When we're pretending something, it's probably a situation where we don't feel safe and comfortable to be our true, authentic self. But when we're acting as if, the goal is to change our behavior. We probably don't like the way that we've been living. Maybe we're tired of pretending, for example. So we start engaging in the behaviors of other people who have the kind of life we want. Hi, I'm Barb Nangle. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery, where I help people heal their emotional, psychological, and spiritual wounds and make deep, lasting changes in their lives. I'm the founder and CEO of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting. I'm a boundaries coach who specializes in helping women who are focused on what others are thinking and doing and neglect themselves in the process. And I have coached hundreds of people on how to build healthy boundaries using my exclusive Build framework. On this podcast, I share my experience, strength, and hope from recovery. I don't support or endorse any particular 12-step recovery fellowship, and I don't claim to speak for any particular 12-step fellowship. I also don't believe that 12-step recovery is the only way to recover. You might need additional help. I'm an avid beachcomber who collects sea glass, shells, wood, and stones. I am a formerly closeted fan of the Hallmark Channel, especially the Christmas movies. Hello, Christmas in July. I wear fingerless gloves from September to June because my hands are always cold, so I have about 15 pairs. And I get a huge kick out of counting how many days, weeks, and months there are until my birthday or Christmas at completely random times of the year. My hope is that you'll find my words concretely helpful in improving your life, whether you're in recovery or not. If you like what you've heard on this episode, please screenshot it and share it on your social media and tag me at Higher Power Coaching. This is episode 276, From Pretending to Purpose, the True Power of Acting as If. I've had a handful of conversations in the last couple weeks about the concept of acting as if. It's been almost 5 years since I recorded an episode about this topic, and my thinking and understanding around the concept have evolved. So I wanted to give an update. I just re-listened to that episode, which, by the way, is very good. And I put a link in the show notes to the episode. It's number 25 if you want to just go to your app and listen to it. I'm glad I listened to it because there are some things that I said there that I wanted to say this time, but now I don't think it's necessary to go over them again because you can just listen to that. There's one thing that I do want to stress that I also said in that episode that's really important to understand, which is that acting as if is not the same as pretending. As you probably know, I'm in the ACA Recovery Fellowship where we recover from the effects of intergenerational dysfunction and trauma. And many, many of us in that program have had to pretend our entire lives. This is not that. We had to pretend in order to feel safe and or to get our needs met as young children. We had to pretend that shit didn't bother us, that we didn't have feelings, that we knew what the hell was going on around us, because it just wasn't safe for us to tell the truth about what was going on inside us, or we had to pretend in public that our family was one way, whatever your family's public persona was, all the while knowing it's not like that behind closed doors. It wasn't safe to share what we were feeling and thinking. It wasn't safe to share that we had questions or we didn't know what was going on. So when people get into recovery and they hear about this concept, act as if, they're often like, wait, I've been acting as if my whole fucking life. How is this any different? And the difference is partly your motivation. The goal of acting as if is to change long-standing patterns of behavior. Pretending is something that we've done to feel safe, to protect ourselves, to avoid intimacy and vulnerability. And the thing is, we can engage in the exact same activity, but have different motives. And that means the way that we experience that activity will be very different based on our motives. My first sponsor said to me, I used to make you a cup of tea so that you would like me. Now I make you a cup of tea because God wants me to be a good person and I want to be a good person. Either way, you get a cup of tea. So on the outside, it looks the same, but the motivation is completely different. And therefore, the experience in the activity is very different. Here's another example. I actually just shared this story last night with my sweetheart. So when I started going to church as an adult after no longer being an agnostic, this is in my mid-30s, I went to a denomination called the Unitarian Universalist Church, which is called UU for short. And there were a lot of people in that denomination there because they fled other religions that really, to put it mildly, left a bad taste in their mouth. So they were there because they were going away from something. Whereas I went to the UU church because I was going toward something. I was seeking something, and that church seemed to have what I wanted at the time. My experience there seemed to be completely different from the experiences of those who were there fleeing something, because they had a lot of baggage that they wanted and needed to shed. There were things like rituals and procedures that they just couldn't tolerate because it reminded them so much of their former church. Whereas I had never experienced any of those things, and I found them to be very loving and beautiful. I was going toward something and they were going away from something. Now, that's probably an experience most of us can identify with, which is that when our motivation is, I got to get the fuck out of here, as opposed to I'm going towards something I want, our experience is radically different, even if the destination is the same. So the same is true when it comes to acting as if versus pretending. When we're pretending something, it's probably a situation where we don't feel safe and comfortable to be our true, authentic self. But when we're acting as if, the goal is to change our behavior. We probably don't like the way that we've been living. Maybe we're tired of pretending, for example. So we start engaging in the behaviors of other people who have the kind of life we want. Let's say you've been broke your entire life. You've had all kinds of thoughts about scarcity and believe that money is hard to make, or that money is bad, or that rich people are assholes, or maybe all of those. If you start doing things like paying attention to your finances, working with a financial advisor, creating a spending plan for your money and sticking to it, and maybe even sharing your fears about money with other people, you may still be thinking all those same scarcity thoughts, at least at first, but those new behaviors will change your financial situation. They have to, because you're being different with your finances. You're acting as if you don't have those scarcity thoughts. And eventually, even if you continue to have those thoughts, you'll have the experience of more financial stability. And you'll then have evidence that there is enough. Maybe money is not hard to make, and your thoughts will start to line up with your lived experience. You cannot become a wealthy person by ignoring your finances. You have to actually pay attention to them and make informed decisions as opposed to just winging it. And I know this very well because I went through this. I declared bankruptcy in 1999 when my student loans came due, because I had so much credit card debt, which, by the way, all of that credit card debt was due to my codependence. I racked it up because of things like buying people's affection, rescuing people, and or managing my image. And I just couldn't pay those and my student loans at the same time. I ignored my bills for years. I would just leave them and not open them. And when I declared bankruptcy, I was working at Yale University where I got paid once a month. And because I was actively ignoring my finances, I would run out of money before the end of every month. And then at the beginning of the month, when I got paid, I was like, oh my God, I have money. So I'd go out and spend without looking at the numbers. And I'd inevitably end up bouncing checks every month. Then I'd have all these fees, which were costing me all this money. If I'd been paying attention, I could have used toward debt instead of accumulating more debt. Now, I am not a dumb person and I know how to do math. This is how deeply entrenched these kinds of patterns and mentalities can be. So if that's you, you are not alone and you can change that shit. So anyway, once I declared bankruptcy, I had to clean up my act. So I went through about a 5-year period of time where I did a massive overhaul of my financial life, really my financial behaviors. One of the most important things that I started doing was balancing my checkbook every single month so as not to bury my head in the sand. Now I do it weekly because my nature is that I want to bury my head in the sand about my finances, and I just can't live like that, especially not now that I have my own business where I support myself. Now, I know that that was a bit of a digression, but my point was that I still had shit tons of scarcity thoughts, and I still have them now, not anywhere near as many, but I do the behaviors of a financially responsible person, and it's impacted my finances. When we're acting as if, we're engaging in the behaviors of people who do or have the kind of life that we want. I mentioned earlier that my thinking has evolved on this. So I'm going to shift to that now. And it's evolved because of what I've learned about the art of manifesting. Now, whether you believe in manifesting or not, I'd like for you to hear me out because it kind of doesn't really matter whether you believe it or not. And I'll explain that in a moment. The idea behind manifesting is not that you just sit around and go, I'm rich, I'm rich, I'm rich, and you magically become rich. That's not it at all. It has everything to do with the way you feel, and it also has to do with taking what's called inspired action. So I'm not going to get into the inspired action right now. You can probably figure out what that means, but this is what I mean when I say it has everything to do with how you feel. If you want to be rich, for example, the reason you want to be rich is because you think that you're going to feel a certain way when you become rich. Maybe we feel like we're going to feel safe, or we're going to feel free, or we're going to feel comfortable or important or more secure. The reality is, though, you don't have to wait until you're rich to feel those things. You can create those feelings right now. There's no need to wait. It's possible to learn to sort of manufacture those feelings, and I'll share more about that in a moment too. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and there was a guy who was a pretty wealthy guy, but he still had lots of scarcity mentality. And I know for those of you who are not wealthy, that might be hard to believe, but it's actually very common. This guy had evidence that he was wealthy, but he just couldn't let go of the scarcity mentality. So his coach asked him, if you had an abundance mentality and truly believed you were wealthy and would always be wealthy, what is one thing you might do differently? And the guy said, I'd tip more generously. So the coach had him start tipping more generously when he went out to restaurants and that sort of thing. And it made him feel generous. It is a lot easier to feel abundant and to think abundant thoughts when you feel generous, which meant he wasn't living in fear that giving an extra few dollars to the waiter or the valet was going to ruin him. Now, of course, there was more to the guy's transformation than that, obviously, but that's an example of an initial behavior one could take to make you feel generous. Now, another way to get into the feelings or to manufacture the feelings, like I mentioned before, is to use your imagination, which is a lot of what I do. Often during meditations is when I do this, and this is where I create scenarios in the future of what I'll be doing when I have the money that I want to have, like going on a retreat with Emily Fletcher from Ziva Meditation, going on a yoga retreat to the island of Crete, taking my sweetheart to Italy so he can go to the Moto Guzzi factory and the Dem Smiley factory, and then going to Iceland and tooling around the country with him. When I imagine those things happening, I feel what I believe I will feel in those situations. In other words, I don't have to wait until I get rich to have those experiences or to have the feelings. And my understanding of the way the universe works, which I'm not going to go into detail right here, that's not really the topic of this podcast, but it includes things like spirituality, prayer, intention, quantum physics, that sort of thing. My understanding is that the language of feelings actually speaks to the universe. And again, I don't need you to believe this. I don't need you to agree with me. Just hear me out. What happens for me when I engage in this kind of meditation and visualization is that I'm not living in scarcity. I'm not living into the wreckage of the future. I am not activating my nervous system, which is what my brain wants to do. My brain wants to think of all the shitty ways that my future is going to play out. And this is my victim mentality. I victimize my own self with my mind by laying out all the disasters that are going to happen and how I'm not going to have any money, which makes my nervous system go completely out of whack. Now, it's one thing for me to stop that thinking as soon as I realize it, to get out of that mentality and to calm my nervous system. I absolutely do that and have been for years, and it's helped tremendously. But what I'm doing with this manifestation thinking is proactively getting my nervous system to feel what I believe it will feel like when I have the things I want to have. In other words, instead of just letting my mind go off and having to turn it back around when something shitty comes to mind, I'm proactively soothing my nervous system by thinking about and therefore feeling the feelings I want to have. What I can tell you is that this has diminished the catastrophizing that my brain does by a ton. Now, it has not gone away entirely, but it is much less frequent than it was even last year. And speaking of living into the wreckage of the future, I would say for me, this is one of the hardest things in my life, if not the hardest, which is not to do what my brain wants, to learn to change the channel from the shitty channel to the lovely channel. Our brains are wired to look for threats, so it's really common to think like this. But growing up in dysfunction and with trauma, we become hyper vigilant and it's exhausting. My brain wants to tell me all the shitty things that are going to happen. And this is why I talk to myself more than I listen to myself. Because if I just listen to myself tell me bad things are going to happen, my nervous system is going to be out of whack all the time. And I don't want to live like that anymore. Now that I know I have a choice. When I say I talk to myself more than I listen to myself, I mean that in many ways. So I literally talk to myself when I say affirmations. I also write things on my mirrors, have sticky notes around my house, record affirmations, etc. And all of it helps me. And I think of that as putting medicine in the reservoir of my brain. The reservoir of my brain has been poisoned for decades with all the shitty, nasty thoughts, and it's great to stop that. The reservoir will eventually purify if I stop poisoning it, but it will purify much faster if I put medicine in to clean it up. When you act as if in your mind, your intention is to create the kind of life you truly want, that is what manifesting is. At minimum, even if manifesting is bullshit and doesn't work, you're not living in the misery or the wreckage of the future. You're not activating your system in the shitty way. You're activating it in a way that's calming and soothing, which is probably how you desire to feel in the future anyway. So you've created the feeling you wanted. You've created the desired result. So to recap, acting as if is not about pretending. It's about engaging in the behaviors that are more likely to get you what you want. Your life will change when you do that. You're feeling overwhelmed because you're overcommitted and just can't keep up. You neglect yourself even though you know you should take better care of yourself, but you just don't have the time. You really want to say no, but just can't get yourself to do it because you don't want to come across as selfish or unhelpful. And you're pretending things are okay with you when they're really not. If this is you, we should talk. Go to barbchat.net and sign up for a free 30-minute call with me about my private coaching. This is for people who are finally ready to make deep, lasting changes in their lives, their relationship patterns, including their relationships with themselves, their partners, family, friends, and colleagues. That's barbchat.net. If you like this podcast, and I'm guessing you did because you're still listening, you will also love my weekly newsletter, Friday Fragments, which has short essays similar to the podcast. You can check it out at fridayfragments.news. That's fridayfragments.news. If you haven't already subscribed to my podcast on your favorite podcast outlet, please do that. It helps carry the message to more people. I started this podcast because there was so much wisdom in recovery that just wasn't making its way out into the world. So I want as many people as possible to hear it. I'd also love it if you'd leave a 5-star rating or a review, which you can do on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find it so they can get the benefits that you've gotten from listening. If someone in particular came to mind when you listen to this episode, please share it with them. And my favorite place to hang out on social media is Instagram. I'm at Higher Power Coaching. Please DM me there. I'd love to hear what you got from this episode. I run private and group coaching programs on building healthy boundaries. Whether you need help with boundaries in your personal, professional, or romantic life, I can help. Head on over to barbchat.net where you can get on my calendar for a free 30-minute Better Boundaries consultation. I also do short-term situational coaching to help people make it through specific situations they're going through, such as divorce, empty nesting, preparing for retirement, or any phase where their identity is shifting. Regardless of the type of coaching, my ideal client is someone who is ripe for change. If that's you, I'd love to work with you. My goal with all my work is to help you make lasting changes in your life, like I've made deep, lasting changes in my life. Remember, it's never too late to recover. No one is beyond hope, and healing is possible. Thanks for listening.